Morning. This is chapter 47, Beware of Fault Lines. Before the Jiffy Company, Dad, Billy, and me had spent the night at a desert campground surrounded by cacti and boulders. Not very many people. In fact, I didn't remember seeing anyone that morning except for Dad, who had his photography stuff spread over the little fold-out table in the camper. Cameras were laid carefully on one side and prints were stretched out over the other. "Stay back," he warned, waving me away with his hand. "I'm working." His eyes were red and puffy. He hadn't slept much at all the last night. And I would know, because I hardly slept anymore either. Nocturnal was how I liked it. That was the only time I could exist without the eyes of Billy watching me. It was the only time the mountains of tectonics that surrounded us when Dad was awake could take a break. That morning I was trying to be quiet, but I needed to find breakfast for Billy and me without bothering him. We'd been parked at the little out in the middle of nowhere Camp of America campground for 2 days, and we were low on supplies. I thought we were somewhere on the border of Arizona and Utah. I crept around the little kitchen looking in the cupboards for the last box of Pop-Tarts. "Liberty," Billy whispered. She lay perched on the fold-out bed above the kitchen table, right over Dad's head. "I need to go to the bathroom." "Quiet," I said. Dad didn't like us to use the bathroom in the camper when we were at a campground because sometimes it stunk. "Okay, just a second," I said. "I'll take you." Tectonics bubbled underneath. Fault lines crisscrossed our camper. I took a deep breath. "Dad?" He ignored me. "Dad?" "What?" He stared at me with eyes that could melt someone into magma. Billy shook her head. She never liked me to talk to him when he was in this kind of mood. "Nothing," I said. I opened another cupboard and reached into the very back. The wood rough and splintery, and there I found the last of the Pop-Tarts. I did a silent, happy dance because behind Dad and raised the box above my head. Pop-Tart Master. There was only one silvery package left. Billy stretched her hand out towards me. "Liberty," she whispered. Then she mouthed the word, "Please." Dad slammed his hand on the table. His cameras bounced closer to the edge. One of the lenses he had been cleaning fell to the floor. Dad cursed. "What do I have to do to get you two to shut up for 5 minutes?" Billy shrank down deeper into the blankets. Her eyes were big. I turned my back on those eyes and tried to be quiet as I opened the package. There were 2 inside, enough to share. Dad, with his baseball cap pulled down low, hunched over the pieces of his camera, holding a screwdriver in his hand. I put one Pop-Tart behind my back and turned to Billy, holding up the other one, and opened my mouth wide. She mouthed the word, "No." I started to hand her the other Pop-Tart, the one from behind my back, but before I could, she reached out to grab the one from my mouth. She reached too far and teetered on the edge of the bunk. Billy's arms flailed, trying to grab anything to keep herself from falling. I reached out. I tried to save her. "Billy," I said, clutching her arm, but it was too late. She fell. Down, down, down. Falling seemed to take forever. She crashed right on top of the table, right on top of Dad, and right on top of all of his precious things. Then everything got fuzzy. Billy screamed, I screamed, and Dad froze. But only for a minute, because it was like tectonics, plates crashing into each other. The big one. Only there was no place to duck and cover. I tried to help. I did. But I slipped on the glass and the pieces poked through my socks. Broken camera lenses, flashes, and prints scattered all over the dirty floor of the camper. And in a flash, I remembered. Just pieces at first. The red faces, the tears, and the yelling. It came back to me like I was watching it on TV. Real memories from when I was little. The lenses crunched under my feet and reminded me to save Billy, because now Dad had her, and he was slapping her, hard. With each slap, I felt like everything inside me shattered. I rebelled against the instinct inside me that told me to run, to save myself first. I wouldn't run away from Billy, not ever. Instead, I dove right into the epicenter, grabbing him around the waist. "Hit me, Dad, hit me," I thought. I bit him as hard as I could on his arm. I tasted blood. Dad yelled and dropped Billy on top of his broken camera. Then he sank to his knees, breathing really hard. His eyes were red and far away, like he wasn't even there. Billy ran to me, and I hugged her close. Then I kicked open the camper door and pulled her outside. away, free from all the shaking. We huddled under a scraggly tree, duck and cover, just like Mrs. Morrison had said. Shaking and sweaty, we crouched under the tree waiting for the earth to right itself. I wiped the tears from her eyes. Billy's face was red and swollen, like she'd been stung by 1,000,000 bees. "Can you see me?" I asked. Billy nodded, and we stayed there for I don't know how long. Then a lady came from nowhere and asked us where our mom was, and she wanted to know where we were from and if everything was all right. So we went back to our campsite and sat at the picnic table until Dad came out. He said nothing, except he had to get gas, so get inside the camper because it was time to go. Chapter 48. Rescue Yourself. "Is that all that happened?" asked Billy, her mouth full of KFC. We were eating on trays over our beds in the hospital, and Billy and me were the only overnight patients. I guess that's a pretty good thing about staying at an itty-bitty hospital. You get lots of special treatment. I swirled gravy into my mashed potatoes. A new nurse was on the night shift and kept poking her head around the corner to make sure we didn't need anything. "And we get to stay here until Dad comes back?" Billy asked. "I think so. We need to ask Pirate Doctor," I said. "Good," said Billy. "I like him. He's nice." That afternoon with Carla, I couldn't tell her anything until she promised she'd keep Billy and me together. Then I told her everything, the whole story, even the bad stuff. No faking it whatsoever. After dinner I tried to sleep, but the sheets were stiff and I still couldn't get used to wearing clothes that didn't belong to me. I pulled on the collar of the t-shirt I wore now. I should have picked a larger one, but it was hard to tell how small the shirt really was when the nurse held it up to me, proclaiming it was just my size. Billy was sleeping in actual pajamas that were in a box of clean used clothes. I rubbed my arm where the IV had been. "Why didn't you drink more water?" Pirate Doctor had asked. "Your sister wasn't nearly as dehydrated as you." "I don't know." And I didn't. I guess when I was protecting Billy all the time, I sort of forgot about myself. Now I rolled over and stared at her sleeping in the bed beside me. Tonight, she barely even said goodnight, but she begged Pirate Doctor to sit by her bed until she fell asleep. He told her stories about all the weird diseases he learned about in medical school and what it was like when he went to El Salvador to help kids who didn't have doctors. I said that, like 1,000,000 iguanas lived in El Salvador, combing the jungle floor for fruit and plants. Billy had told me to shh when I interrupted him. She usually liked to listen to me talk about animals, but not tonight. I rolled over and pulled the sheet off of me. It was too hot and my head hurt. I stood up and pulled the curtains back. The moon set high in the cloudless sky, so large and white that it made me squint. Where was our dad? Why didn't he come back? I'm sure Mom knew where he was. Was she up in heaven? I thought if she was going to be anywhere, she'd be in the ocean, swimming with a pod of dolphins, or splashing through the waves with a huge smile on her face, searching for shore for Billy and me. I let the curtains go, not wanting to think those thoughts. I liked it better when they stayed in hibernation. But still, they crept out. What would happen now? Would we stay together? What if Billy wanted to stay here with Pirate Doctor's hospital forever? He seemed to maybe want a Billy girl who was shiny gold and sometimes had angel wings. What would happen to me? Who would ever want me, so serious and plain and non-shiny? Billy sighed in her sleep. I turned towards her and noticed a light shining from underneath the door. My throat was sore with what-if questions. I could barely swallow. When I pushed on it, the door slipped open. Everything quiet like the inside of a clam shell. Pirate Doctor must have been asleep, and maybe the nurse was too. She hadn't been in for a few hours. I crept forward to the living room lobby, and there it was, the phone. Suddenly, I wanted to use it. I had to try at least one last time before I gave up hope completely. I'd call Julie. I picked up the receiver, smooth and cold in my hand, and dialed Julie's cell phone number, and expected to hear the weird beeping. When the phone began to ring, and before I could talk myself into hanging up, I heard Julie's voice. Her voicemail for sure. "Hello?" I hesitated. "Hello? Liberty, is that you?" My voice stuck where my heart was, and for a second even my cranium couldn't compute what was happening. Finally I said, "Julie, it's me." Tears streaming down my face like I had a leak. I couldn't speak, except for what sounded like weird gulping noises. Then she said, "Liberty, is that you? I was just in the middle of listening to my messages. Are you okay?" And then instead of crying, I laughed. and the phone slipped out of my hand because it was covered in snot and tears and sweat. And then Pirate Doctor was there, standing in the doorway. His eyes were furrowed, his mouth turned down. He was mad. No, he wiped underneath his patch. He was sad. And he let me talk to her until there was nothing else to say, and the heaviness fell away. For a second, I felt like I was glowing and maybe I could fly, because Julie said she was sorry. Julie didn't know Dad had gotten bad. Julie had been in Guatemala taking care of sick kids, but she was back now, and she would come get us.